Do I think Trump should be kicked off the ballot? Trump's criminal turmoil about to overshadow the campaign trail.
Trump's legal team facing a very busy 24 hours ahead. Trump's lawyers are expected to appeal 2 decisions to remove him from the primary ballots in Colorado and in Maine. With us now to explain all of it, CNN senior legal analyst Ali Honig at the Magic Wall. Really at any moment now, it could happen at any moment. Yeah. We expect the appeals, a appeal, 2 appeals. We'll have to wait and see. Just to step back, though, what's the landscape right now in this new year?
Yeah, Phil, so the 14th Amendment, Section 3, has gone from relative constitutional obscurity to the spotlight very quickly. Let's just remind ourselves what it says. No person shall hold any office who shall have engaged in insurrection or rebellion or given aid or comfort to the enemies thereof. Seems fairly straightforward. The problem is it is being interpreted and applied very differently across the map.
This is silly. He was not found guilty of insurrection. Case closed. I mean, I don't disagree with you on this either. I mean, like, I guess the argument is, like, if you're a bank robber but you haven't been found guilty of robbing the bank yet, and you somehow are free to, like, walk into banks, should people restrict your access to banks a little bit? I mean, you haven't been found guilty. Like, I don't know. That's not how it works. I mean, the entire point is the entire point is that the historically relevant part of this is that it hasn't been used on people that were immediately put up for trial. You know what I mean? So technically, historically speaking, a trial is not a necessity. But I think that that's a dangerous precedent in general. So I don't know if I fully agree with that, is what I mean. In theory, I don't agree with that. The argument is it's self-executing, like you can't run for president when you're 25 years old. That requires no conviction. There will be due process requirement. Yeah, the difference between someone being 25 and someone aiding and abetting in an insurrection is that one does require conviction, the other does not. That's the difference. Also, not 25, 35. I don't know why I just read that and said 25. Which Confederates were tried and found guilty of insurrection? No, I agree. I agree in its application. It was not utilized in that way. I just don't agree with doing it that way. That's my point. I think allowing people to treat Trump like he's guilty before he's proven guilty is a slippery slope that racial minorities. No, I mean, no. This argument always goes back to racial minorities and marginalized communities and blah, blah, blah. It's like, oh, you can't do this. Can't have gun restrictions because then it'll be used against racial minorities. Like, there are certain instances where restrictions and the application of the rule of law is a necessity, regardless of how white supremacist the system is, that might actually bastardize it and weaponize it, okay? You don't make that argument for, again, seatbelt laws, because, like, black people are more likely to be pulled over for any kind of restriction, any kind of rule that might be applied to them, where they can just claim, well, you're not wearing a seatbelt. It's the system itself that is white supremacist. Trump does not need to be convicted to be disqualified from holding office. Just read, dude. Brother, I understand that. I'm saying I disagree with it. Why are you yelling at me? Am I not allowed to disagree with this? Why are you getting so mad? Read the 14th Amendment, Section 3, dumbass. Trump does not need to be convicted to be disqualified from holding office. Just read, dude. Here's a fast historical overview of the 14th Amendment, Section 3 by a historian that makes some of the same points you are making. Disqualifying Trump via Section 3 of the 14th Amendment by William Hoagland. I disagree with this as well, but I think it's objectively hilarious, so who's to say if it's right or wrong? I mean, that's the second aspect of it. The reason as to why they are mad is because most, if not all, Trump supporters are deeply insecure and defend that piece of shit with passion because he is their entire identity. Certainly, but also, listen, I think there's 2 different things here at play. One, as someone who doesn't believe in, like, the American institutions, of course, I'll sit back and, kick my feet up and enjoy the show and laugh about whatever the outcome is, because either way, one party is going to get upset and it'll be funny. But having said that, if you were to ask me what my genuine perspective is on this matter, do I think Trump should be kicked off the ballot? I think Trump should not be kicked off the ballot. I'm a firm believer that you should literally be able to, once again, one of the only American pro-prisoner reforms that we have, or something that's in the law, is that even if you can't vote, you can run for president from prison. And I think that's a good thing. I don't think it's a bad thing. I think it's a good thing, okay? Now, this has nothing to do with that, okay? Before chatters who are, this chatter in particular, who was like rushing to dunk on me on this, I know that wouldn't change this decision. Oh my God. What I was going to say is, I think that's a good idea that prisoners should be able to run for office, and they should also be able to even vote, right? And beyond that, I think that disqualifying someone, specifically because you believe that they've aided and abetted an insurrection, which I believe Trump did, especially before they were convicted personally of said crime. And what the severity is, it needs to have a super high standard, super high bar to clear, in my opinion. There's a move on to invoke Section 3 of the Constitution's 14th Amendment ratified in 1868 to disqualify former President Trump from re-election. According to Section 3, a person who is sworn to uphold the Constitution when serving in the federal or state government and has then engaged in insurrection or given aid and comfort to insurrectionists can hold elected office in those governments. The original intent was to bar certain leaders from the former Confederacy from holding office. I think in a way I am doing what I get mad at liberals on, because I feel like this is something that Republicans would do 100%. In theory, I don't agree with it, but also it's like decent politics, I guess, even though it is still going to not work because the institutions are already not really interested in upholding anything and instead just upholding right-wing hegemony. So the Supreme Court is going to defend Trump, and then this will turn into, look how they tried to massacre my boy, but Teflon Don still survives, and it will galvanize his base of support. That's what I think. I don't feel that way about the Georgia case, the RICO one. I don't feel that way about the other instances like the federal cases, the criminal trial. I do agree with those. I think it's, you should hold him to account. You should hold him to the rule of law. But if you go, if you're too heavy-handed and it backfires, I don't know. We'll see. Our Section 3 disqualification doesn't require a prior criminal conviction on charges that are insurrection. The answer is no. The reasons are based on a combination of the basic structure of our legal system and the original meaning of Section 3. A standard element of our legal system is that the same events often give rise to both civil and criminal liability. For example, a person who commits rape, murder, or assault is subject to criminal penalties and also to civil suits by his or her victims. In such cases, criminal conviction is not a prerequisite for civil liability. Indeed, even an actual acquittal on criminal charges doesn't necessarily preclude civil lawsuits against the perpetrator. Just ask O.J. Simpson, exactly, who won the glove don't fit, you must acquit, won the criminal trial, got a criminal acquittal, but then lost a $33.5 million civil liability. The criminal and civil cases were distinct, and the result of one did not determine that of the other. The same reasoning applies to Trump. The absence of criminal conviction for insurrection doesn't immunize him from civil proceedings arising from his role in the January 6th attack on the Capitol. Disqualification under Section 3 is a civil issue, not a criminal one. It cannot result in a prison sentence or other criminal sanctions. There are many reasons why civil and criminal cases arising from the same events might turn out differently. The most obvious is that criminal conviction requires proof beyond a reasonable doubt, whereas a civil plaintiff does not and can prevail merely based on a preponderance of evidence standard. Slightly more than 50% chance that her position is right. For a legal standard to allow people who are convicted criminals to be able to become president or to be able to run and be on ballots, to then turn around and toss someone off specifically on a civil case where the standard is much lower, I think is not appropriate. Does that make sense? Even though this is directly a crime that pertains to winning or losing an election and then trying to have your way regardless by force. Does that make sense for chatters? This is my perspective on it. In the Colorado Section 3 case, state courts found that the plaintiffs had sufficient proof to satisfy a clear and convincing evidence standard, a higher burden than preponderance, but less proof beyond a reasonable doubt. The lower standard of proof and other procedural differences between criminal and civil cases are justified by the generally less severe consequences at stake in the latter. Civil defendants don't risk the death penalty, prison terms, or getting a criminal record. In this case, Trump doesn't even face the prospect of forfeiting any of his property or paying damages. All he stands to lose is eligibility for various state and federal government jobs. There are situations where the consequences of civil liability are so grave that the civil-criminal distinction may seem artificial, as when defendants end up paying enormous damages that force them into bankruptcy. This is such a libertarian... God, Reason is a libertarian outlet, so it's really funny that they wrote this where, like... Only a libertarian think tank would write, bankruptcy is akin to the death penalty. Being relegated to the destitute conditions of poverty is akin to being shot by the state. That's awesome. A short prison term might be less painful than that. In addition to the general considerations about the structure of the legal system, there are also points specific to the original meaning of Section 3. None of the ex-Confederates who were adjudged disqualified during Reconstruction had ever been convicted of any crimes related to their roles in the Civil War. That strongly suggests the original understanding didn't require prior criminal conviction for insurrection or any other offense before an insurrectionist could be disqualified. They're comparing prison bankruptcy to losing the ability to run for office, not the death penalty, Lamau. No, they're comparing bankruptcy to going to prison and anything else, and saying going to prison is like getting bankrupt. If not, bankruptcy is worse than going to prison. I am exaggerating by saying the death penalty because they brought up the death penalty up here when talking about what can happen in a criminal case versus a civil one. And I think that's pretty funny to be like, well, bankruptcy is much, much worse than going to prison. Anyway, in addition, it's important to recognize that tens of thousands of Confederate troops had surrendered under parole terms that arguably exempted them from prosecution for their wartime activities, so as long as they did not engage in further insurrection or other lawbreaking.